This is part 5 of the Shooting Fundamentals series. I'm going to be covering two aspects in this video. One is breathing and the other one is follow through. Let's start with breathing. Now, obviously, breathing naturally is important for us to function as human beings, keeping oxygen in our brains and our muscles. Sometimes when we're hyper-focused on an activity like shooting a gun, we will extend, and I'm sure you've all done this before. I've done it myself. You're sitting there and you're like holding your breath, or you let all of the air out and you're sitting there with no oxygen, and what starts to happen? The sights start to become blurry. The gun starts to move because you're depriving your brain of oxygen. It's going to affect your vision and it's going to make you shake, okay? So the question is how to breathe. Well, how to breathe really depends on what you're doing, okay? If you're zeroing a rifle or precision rifle shooting, breath control is super important, and there are many ways that you can do that, okay? Some people take in a full breath and then let out a third of it and hold that. Some people expel their entire breath to take a shot. Some people just hold their breath all the way. When we're talking about handgun, the implication, I think, is that we're doing something a little bit more dynamic. There may be movement involved, multiple shots, and so forth. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but here's a tip for you. Whenever I draw or present the firearm, I tend to let my breath out. So I breathe out. That settles my sights, kind of directs my motion rather than holding my breath, and that immediately tightens up my body. So let me do a couple of presentations, kind of show you what I mean. I'll also draw from the holster. All right, so here's an example of what I'm talking about. Once again, this is just an isolated example. I'm not moving around or running around. Things have obviously changed quite a bit. But usually, even if I am moving quite a bit, when I'm engaging, I tend to think of expelling my breath out. Okay, so from the standpoint of a simple presentation here, okay, same thing if I draw from the holster. I come out of the holster, okay, that's kind of how I think of it, because if I think of holding my breath in, it immediately makes me tight. Okay, what I want is I want to be loose and I want to be fluid with the gun. Try it out when you're presenting with handgun. Now, the next aspect, follow through, that can mean a lot of things, okay? You can have follow through on a trigger. You can have follow through on a target. You can have mechanical follow through. You can also have follow through on your sight picture. Just to cover each one of these a little bit, let me start with follow through on a trigger. This is something you see beginners do a lot, all right? What they'll do is they'll fire and watch my trigger finger as I fire. They'll fire and then immediately take their trigger out of the trigger guard. Here's the next shot. They take that out, okay? Remember, you want to follow through with the trigger the same way as like when you swing a tennis racket or a baseball bat. You don't stop when you hit the ball, you follow through. Same thing with the trigger. You want to follow that trigger through all the stages. Okay, so I'm going to cover following through for sight picture and kind of simultaneously following through for mechanically, physically. So one of the things that really gets on my nerves is when I watch people shoot on the range and they do something like this. All right, that would be an example of zero follow through on both of those things. Let's talk about sight picture first. Whether I'm firing one shot or whether I'm firing 10 shots, I always want to maintain my sight picture after I'm done with my string of shots. Almost like I'm going to take an additional shot, but I don't. I get a sight picture. Why? Because, especially from a defensive standpoint, if I'm shooting at a threat, okay, I want to see if what I did worked, all right? I want to have the gun in a position where if I need to fire it again or re-engage a target, my gun's in a position to do so, all right? The other reason mechanically is, let's compare this to taking a picture with a camera. Has this ever happened to you before? You go to take the picture, you actually push the button, then immediately move the camera. What happens with the picture? You get a blurry picture, right? So it's the same thing. When you take the picture, you press the button, and then you hold still for a moment or two afterwards. It's the same concept, okay? So Let me now give you an example of proper follow-through. I'm going to fire one shot. I'm going to follow through. I'm going to then fire 2 rounds, follow through, 3 rounds, follow through, just so you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about here. All right, here we go. So one shot. Here I go. Now I'm all imagining I get another sight picture before I bring that gun back to the ready. If it were 2 rounds, it would look like this. Bring it back. If it were 3 rounds, it would look like this. Okay, notice how I'm pausing after I shoot. That gives me a chance to assess the target. That also gives me a chance to take care of safety protocol. I get my finger out of the trigger guard, assess what happened. In other words, were my shots effective? Do I need to fire again, etc. All right, that about wraps it up for the fundamentals of shooting. I hope you enjoyed the videos and I hope to see you on the range soon.